everyone, welcome back to Rolling Solo. My name is Adam Smith, and yes, we are going to be diving into a showcase starting right now for Too Many Bones Undertow. This is a game designed by Adam Carlson and Josh Carlson. It's a standalone expansion as well as a standalone game to Too Many Bones. So this fully allows you to jump in or get an entry point into the Too Many Bones world without having to have the core experience. But if you do have the core experience, you are now going to be able to explore more of the world that's being created by Chip Theory Games. And this is a fantastic entry point as it allows you to play true solo. You can play multi-handed with multiple Gearlocs, and that's what we plan to do in this playthrough. It was 1 year, maybe a year and a half today or so that we did the Too Many Bones core experience playthrough on the channel. I had a ton of fun with it. You guys seemed really engaged at the time. Those of you that were with the channel at that point in time remember that playthrough very well, but you also probably remembered at the end of that playthrough I promised to do a Too Many Bones two-handed or two Gearloc playthrough. So we'd already covered the true solo, playing with just one, and now it was time to handle two at once. Well, Undertow has landed on the shores of backers as well as individuals who've picked it up from the Chip Theory Games store. And now we're going to dive in and see what this game has to offer. I'm going to be able to show you guys in this full playthrough how this game truly works. Now, the purpose of this particular video is going to be to get the game to the table in the shortest amount of time with no rules explanation. So we're going to simply be dropping items onto the table, putting them into the correct positions, and then moving forward. Once we get to the actual playthrough, I will take the first couple days of our journey within Too Many Bones to go through the rules with you and get the flow of the game down before we then start speeding things up as we traverse further down the river and into the unknown. So without further ado, guys, if you're willing to join me, let's head in with a setup. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to place the battle mat in the center of our play area. This is going to be the major focal point of the entire campaign. We'll be constantly using this battle mat. You'll want it in the center of your table. And also note with Undertow, unlike the original core experience, this particular mat or battle mat is double-sided. One side is a raft with some water and the other side is a land location. So we're going to leave the land location facing up for now. This next part of the setup really hinges on whether or not you've picked up the adventure map for Too Many Bones Undertow and the core experience. So the newest version of the adventure map is actually double-sided as well as stitched. It's got Undertow on one side and the core experience on the other with a completely different map. Now I'm choosing to place this to the left of my battle map. That's where I'd like it to be. You can place it wherever you would like. In this particular case, based on the rules though, if you didn't own the adventure map, which is a completely separate add-on, then all you have inside the Undertow core game is this day counter, and this day counter will allow you to place a chip here, which obviously comes inside of Undertow, and it's turned and keeps track of the number of days as you progress through your journey. Now the bonus here to having the adventure map and actually picking this up separately is that not only are you getting a slot where you can put the time chip in order to keep track of your days and it just looks cool, it also thematically boosts your experience because you're actually looking at a map as you progress through the game, so you can see where your tyrant is. It sits in one of these circular shadowed spaces. Dependent again on which tyrant you choose, which we'll do in the next step, will be placed in one of these circular areas here, and that'll denote how many different progress points that you need based on these nodes to get to that particular tyrant and defeat it. Encounters are in white, tyrant layers are in red, and tyrants are obviously in the shadowed circular areas. So this to me is a massive and definite add-on to the game because it really thematically enhances the game. It also helps to deal with keeping track of progress points and keeping that day counter slotted in an area where it's not going to get moved around or bumped. But for this particular setup, I've chosen to put it to the left of the battle mat. Next, we're going to take the day counter chip and we're going to place it inside the neoprene mat and just make sure that the number 1 is facing north. I'll place my progress bead right up here in Obendar, right at the beginning of the trail as it leads out down the river, and now we have to choose our tyrant. The next major decision in your setup is going to be choosing a tyrant. This is really important because this is the enemy. This is the biggest enemy you're going to be facing in your entire campaign. So in this particular case for Undertow, we have Barnacle, Colossum, the Goblin Queen, and Volkesh at the very end. These are 4 very different tyrants, and there is one other which is off screen, which I will be facing, but I'll talk about that in a second. In the very bottom right-hand corner of these cards is the game length. You can quickly see which ones at a rough estimate are the longer ones to play. You can also take a look at the days here, which are the sun icon underneath the progress points. Those denote how many days you have to actually get to that particular tyrant and defeat it. You only have a certain number of days, which again, as mentioned earlier, is tracked with the day counter that we've already slotted into the adventure map. Above it, you've got progress points. These are the number of progress points you have to obtain, so basically successful encounters that you can take every day that gain you progress points. And once you get enough of them, you can then encounter the tyrant. So if you're good enough, you can actually encounter the tyrant quite early and have multiple chances to take it down. Doesn't always work out, but it's really nice. So the other tyrant, and the one we'll be going after in this showcase, is Nobulus. That's right, we're going to go after literally the longest game length tyrant that Undertow has to offer, and on top of it, Nobulus actually has another tyrant that's involved and comes along with him. So we'll take both of those cards right now. So once you've chosen your tyrant, and in this case there's 2 of them, which may seem strange to anybody that's new to Too Many Bones, usually there's just one of these cards. In this particular case, you'll notice very faintly in the bottom right hand corner it says using conjunction with Nobulus. So basically these 2 tyrants work together, making your life even more fun. But the next important thing you're going to need to find is tyrant encounter cards, and you'll find them, they'll look just like this. You're going to want to find all the tyrant encounter cards in the game, keep them in a stack, and then you're going to want to go to the very bottom of those particular cards and find the ones that actually state the tyrant that you're playing. So in this case, Nobulus, and you'll see it even tells you how many of those particular cards there are. You're going to want to make sure you have all of them. So I have 1 of 2 and 2 of 2. I've grabbed all the tyrant encounters for the tyrant we've chosen to go after. Alright, so now we're going to go ahead and take our tyrant chips, which I've gone ahead and found. 1 for each of the tyrants. We have Nobulus there on the left and the Abomination on the right, and we're going to place them in the appropriate tyrant location. So we'll stack them up like this, and I know that it's right here off, well, where an Abomination would you'd expect to find one, out in the cold winter, just like up here in Canada. So basically our tyrants are stacked right here. Now you also might be wondering, well, how do you know that it's this node right here that connects up to this one right here? Well, you'll take a look at the map. You'll see this node is close to this shadow mark. This node is for this one. Here's one here for this one. There's one next to every single one of these circles. The next question is, well, how do you know if you're supposed to traverse 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There's 2 of them that are 7 away. Well, in those particular cases where there's 2 and you're not sure which belongs where, sometimes thematically the enemy that you're facing just makes sense to go in a particular location, like the Abomination here going in a snow-covered region makes sense. Other times, if you're not so sure, you can actually go to one of the other tyrants that you're not facing and take a look at the text at the very front of the card. And sometimes it'll even tell you, like this one here, Volkesh says he'll be raining from on top of Elder Point. Well, there you go. So that's the exact location that this tyrant is supposed to be at. So now I know 100% that I'm correct in putting Nobulus here with the Abomination. So those 2 chips are now in place. We now have to grab each of their tyrant dies, which we'll then place on top of them. So in order to determine which tyrant dice belong to which tyrant, because that is also a problem when you have a lot of dice in a game, you flip over your tyrant cards to the back side. Normally you only have 1. Nobulus has 2. So there's some text here on one side, and then there's the actual die breakdown over here. I'm not really going to look at it or focus at it, but I just want to look at the symbols to make sure that I'm matching up the correct die. Find the faces that match. As long as they do, you know you've grabbed the correct die. So this is Nobulus's die, and this is the Abomination's die. And then we'll take these 2 tyrant encounter cards. I'm just going to go ahead and place them above, just north of where this adventure map is, way up here. For now, we're going to reference those very, very soon when we begin to build up the baddies. But for now, that is going to work. We're also going to take those tyrant encounters that we pulled out earlier and get them ready to be merged into the encounter deck. Lastly, before we deal with the encounter deck, we're going to take all the cards that are not going to be used in this particular campaign. So all the tyrant encounters here that have to do with tyrants that we're not using, and all the tyrants that we chose not to use, as well as the day counter card we don't need because we're using the adventure map, and all of those items are going to go back to the box. So in addition to the cards that just went back to the game box, we're also going to find the campaign cards and epilogue cards and make sure those are not part of any other decks that we're going to be using during the encounter setup. So make sure these cards are returned back to the box if you're just doing a regular game of Too Many Bones where you choose a single tyrant and try to take that tyrant down. There is a newly implemented campaign mode for those that want to experience a longer and more complete journey. Undertow basically comes with a built-in campaign using these cards, gives you the opportunity to face multiple tyrants, spec out your Gearlocs, and play out a full story that Chip Theory was able to create within Undertow. And I definitely recommend that you basically discover that on your own, but for the purposes of this showcase, we're just going to be doing a one-shot epic campaign to go after Nobulus. So we'll take these two piles and head them back to the game box. Next, we're going to move into the encounter deck. We're going to build this thing, and we've got the decks broken out in a specific way. We have two green decks left and right. We have special encounters across the top. You might be wondering how and why these are all broken out the way they are. Well, this will make explanation a little bit easier. We have our tyrant card in the middle because we're going to need to reference that. That's also very important. So basically what we have here is two green encounter decks. These are the most important things. Basically get all of your green cards together and look at the very bottom here. In the center of the card, there's keywords general on the left here and solo on the right. If you're playing with one Gearloc, you will be using this encounter deck in order to pull encounters for your true solo adventure, and it has to be with just one Gearloc. So if you're playing with two like I am for this showcase, this deck can go back to the box. Next, we're going to take the remaining deck here, the general deck, because we are playing solo, but we're playing multi-handed, two Gearlocs or more. So we're going to be grabbing from the general pile here, and we're going to shuffle that deck together, and I'll be doing this momentarily. And then we're going to draw encounter cards equal to the number of days shown on the tyrant card minus 2 cards. So we're going to take a look here at this particular tyrant card, and you'll see here that we have 10 full days to take on Nobulus and take Nobulus down. So we need to pull 8 encounters because it's 10 minus 2 from this particular deck. And we do it at random. So I'm showing general number 1 on the very top, but I'm going to be shuffling this entire deck and then pulling out 8 encounter cards. All right, I've gone ahead now and I've chosen 8 cards at random from that encounter deck, which has gotten a lot smaller. And next, we're going to go ahead and grab the 2 tyrant encounters that are specific to Nobulus and place them on top just like this. But then we'll be shuffling this deck together for a total of 10 cards. Alright, so the encounter deck is all shuffled up. Tyrant cards are mixed in. We have a total of 10 cards underneath this encounter cover card. You might have wondered where that came from. That also is inside the base game of Undertow and is very useful in keeping the top card from being shown or visible to everybody and spoiling something. So what I did was I shuffled those cards together under the table where I couldn't see them, and then I just placed that cover card on top and placed it right here in front of the camera for you guys. So I have no idea what's on top. Now the next step of the encounter setup is to look at these special encounters. Basically, the easiest way to do this is break them into 3 different decks. You really only need to focus on 2 of them. One deck is going to be special encounters 1 through 4, and the other one is going to be special encounters 5 through 8. You're going to grab 1 card from this deck and 1 card from this deck and place them on top of each other. So this card at the very top, this card underneath, and those 2 cards are going to sit on top of the rest of the encounters that you've already randomly placed. Once you take the random card from here and take the random card from here, so let's say hypothetically we grab this one and this one, although I won't be doing that because I'll be grabbing them randomly, then you place them on top of this deck. Now all I would do is just place them on top and slide the cover card back up over top. The reason you do this is because essentially these special encounters are going to give you kind of easy into the campaign. They're going to ease you into the adventure, because if you started with some of these encounters here, the regular encounters right out of the gates, you would would probably get hammered with damage and likely be in quite a bit of pain very quickly. But these special encounters kind of give you something to just slowly make your way into the adventure, get some training points, and get going before the nasty surprises start coming at you. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to randomly select one from here and here, place them on top of this particular encounter deck, and then keep the cover card on top. And that's going to conclude the setup of the encounter deck. So the encounter deck now underneath of the cover card basically starts with a day 1 encounter, which you can even see right here on the bottom right hand corner has a 1. So you know that all cards coming from these specific cards I mentioned earlier are 1s. And I pulled one at random and placed it on. And then the day 2 encounter will be second in line. And then after that we get into the general encounters and potentially tyrant encounters we might even find. This particular special encounter deck we're not going to actually need whatsoever. There's not even a day marker as there is on these ones. So you'll again notice when you're breaking these apart, it's easy to note which ones are for day 1 and day 2. These are just additional, and essentially the game may call for special encounters to be added to the encounter deck as you go through your journey. But for now, you can basically take all of the special encounters that are no longer being used in the encounter deck you've created and put them back into the game box. Once the encounter deck is created, you can go ahead and place this on either the left or right hand side of the battle mat, whichever works for you. In my case, because I have the adventure mat on the side, I'm going to put it on the right hand side. You're going to want to keep the top of the battle mat empty for what's going to be the setup for battles, which will be an ongoing thing throughout your campaign. So it's better to put things to the left or the right of the battle mat. The next step is going to be to shuffle all the loot and trove loot cards and place them both chest side up so that you're not seeing what is inside of them to the right of the battle mat. And we'll also place the 4 lock-picking dice nearby or next to the trove loot. We'll be using those lockpicking dice to try to break into that trove loot throughout our campaign. Now it's time to get our baddies set up. We're going to take a look at the tyrant card right here. At the very bottom left hand corner we've got 3 icons, so those are the types of baddies that we'll be bringing into this particular campaign. So from the stacks that I've already divided up in your base game box for Undertow, you'll have a pile of 1s, 5s, 20s, as well as 2 stacks of 3. These 2 stacks of 3 are for 2 new types of baddies that are introduced into Undertow. So for now we won't be referencing those, but it's easy to just categorize things before you start sorting by breaking them down into these groups. And now we're going to go through each of these 3 stacks looking for all baddies that have these corresponding icons on them. So you can see right here, the icon is just in the very bottom right hand corner of the baddie chip. And as long as it matches one of the icons on the tyrant chip, those are the baddies that you want to pull out of the stacks of 1s, 5s, and 20s. So I'm going to pull them all out right now. Alright, and because we're facing Nobulus, literally none of the baddies are removed from these piles, and now I've just gone ahead and placed them in the tray, which does come inside of the Undertow box, so that I'm easily able to go grab these within arm's reach during gameplay. So we've got the 1s, 5s, and 20s, which include all 3 different types of baddies within Undertow, but that's not all. There are also 2 new types of baddies introduced into Undertow that those from the core experience will not be familiar with. The ones on the right here are considered the Krellin in the lighter color, and on the far left hand side we have the mechs. Once you have all the stacks prepared for all the specific types of baddies that are on your tyrant card, as we mentioned earlier, you're going to want to shuffle those stacks so that you have absolutely no idea in what order these are going to come out. Next, we're going to go ahead here and put the premium health chips inside of a tray that comes inside of the core box. The premium health chips you have to pick up separately. They do not come in the core experience. If you don't have the premium chips, they'll look a little bit different. They won't have the labels on them and they won't be as heavy, but you still set them up in the same manner. For me, I'm going to place them just above my trove loot and where my particular tyrant cards are sitting, off to the right hand side of the board. As well in the middle, you have these brown chips, which are considered wreckage or obstacle chips that you're going to be using and may impact the gameplay as you go along. The next major step is to choose your Gearloc. So every player, in this case just me as I'm playing solo, I'm going to be using 2 Gearlocs. I can choose from one of either of the 2 Gearlocs inside of the base game of Undertow. One is Duster, the other is Stanza. And I've chosen for this particular playthrough to run with Duster. and add a surprise entry into this particular campaign that is going to bring an expansion character into our playthrough. But first, let's talk about how we set up our Gearlocs. Once you've chosen your Gearloc, you're going to need your Gearloc chip, you'll need your Gearloc's neoprene mat, as well as the 4 stat dice for the Gearloc, and they're all color-coded, so it's really easy to find them, plus the initiative die for your Gearloc. And the last thing you'll do for the Gearloc is you're going to go ahead and find all the Gearloc's stat dice. So you'll see here we've got stat dice for Duster, all 16 of them. In the top left-hand corner there's numbers. We got them all in a row so that as we unlock them in the stat matrix area here, they're all going to be able to be easily referenced and found and brought over. You can also take the stat dice and you can place them inside this tray if you want to, or you can just leave them outside. These 4 stat dice will end up eventually, hopefully, being successful in landing in one of these major areas here like health, dexterity, attack, or defense. And finally, you'll want to place the number of health chips that's noted right here up in the stat area for Duster. So in this case, Duster has 3 health. So we'll place 3 health chips underneath the Gearloc chip in the prep area, which is this area right here. The last major piece to setting up your Gearloc is finding your Gearloc's reference sheet. So Duster's reference sheet's easy to find. The name is here, the art is here. You've got a full dice icon key as well as the different sides of each of the stat dice in a row by row fashion here. They're all listed out in different categories, whether you're following a train on the stat matrix, which is underneath here. You'll see they're all color coded: purple, orange, red, and blue. And you'll see on this particular chart that all those are broken out easily for you to reference here. What you're really looking for during setup, though, is these particular bullet points beside each of the stat dice. What you're looking for is a circle that's around the bullet point. And so as you go through these bullet points, you'll notice some have a star. If you see a star, it just means that the skill can be trained. We'll talk about that later. But essentially, it's not relying on any other skill to be trained. And you can just, as long as you have the training point to spend, you can spend it. So you want to ignore anything that's starred, ignore anything that's just a true bullet. Continue on down until you finally find a bullet that has a circle around it. And you might find more than one on particular Gearlocs, but Duster only has one, and it's Nightshade. And that means at the very beginning during setup, you're going to grab that particular stat die and you're going to add it into your stat or skill matrix. So we're going to go ahead right now and add Nightshade into the skill matrix. And just like that, we now have Nightshade, the stat die, inside of the skills matrix for Duster. So the stat die for Nightshade is now in the skills matrix, but the stat die itself is an initiative die. You'll see it very much looks very similar to Duster's initiative die, and that's because it is. Basically, Nightshade will come in to protect Duster throughout the campaign. We'll talk more about the mechanics of that when we get into the playthrough. For now, the only thing you need to do in setup is have the chip, which represents Nightshade, close by, and know that Nightshade is going to start with 2 HP. So you can go ahead and take 2 HP chips and just place them underneath of Nightshade so that Nightshade's ready to go. The second Gearloc that's going to be joining us on our campaign against Nobulus is going to be Gasket, and this was a character that was released as an expansion separate to Undertow, but came out around the same time, and this was one that I gravitated to right away. I really, really like not only the artwork, the look of this particular character, but it's very different than any of the other characters, being that we've got ourselves a full-on mech here. So you'll notice that the health for Gasket is only 1, so we're not only grabbing the Gearloc chip for this, but we're only placing 1 health underneath, as it seems to rely heavily on defense, at least initially. We also are going to grab the initiative die here, place that on the Gearloc chip, and next we'll reference Gasket's Gearloc reference card to find out what skill dice it starts with. Gasket's reference card notes 2 skill dice it's going to start with: Hydro Valve and the Primary Canister. So we'll slot those 2 skill dice into the neoprene mat for Gasket to start off. Now we'll focus on the other component step of the setup, which essentially is filling out the rest of the setup and finalizing everything so we can get ready to play. So you're going to want to have some attack dice within easy reach, and I've put some inside of Gasket's tray as well as some inside of Duster's tray. And we've done the exact same thing for the defensive dice. We got the defensive dice dropped in the tray for Gasket and doing the exact same thing for Duster. Again, you can choose to place these within an area within easy reach. They don't have to be in the trays because it's specific on your Gearlocs mat how many dice of attack or defense they actually get to roll. These are just to keep the pools of dice organized. Now we're going to go ahead and we're going to add some effect dice into the common pool of dice that we can roll when effects come into play during battles, which we'll see. So again, this is a common pool that can be rolled for any of the Gearlocs, but I'm just storing some in each of the Gearlocs tray for now. They're the black dice on the far right. And lastly, we'll drop in a loot die so that we can use this as part of the common pool as well. It's the one that has the purple chest on it. Now we're going to move over to the battle mat. We're going to add the lane markers just above where the lanes are on the battle mat. So you'll see they're all numerically listed as 1, 2, 3, and 4. So just go ahead and place your lane markers just above those. Then go ahead and find all of the initiative dies for each of the lanes, and in order to determine which ones go where, they're color coded, as well as they also have a listing of the lane in the far bottom right hand corner of each side of the die. So a 4 down here, a 2 here, a 1, and a 3. Don't worry about the major number on each of these initiative dice. They will be rolled when baddies come into play on the battle mat, and that's when they'll matter. Right here is the initiative meter. We're going to place a round counter die inside of that meter to the left. Now you'll want to find the D6 that comes inside of Undertow. There is only one of them, and you'll be using them to roll during some encounters within the game. And you're also going to want to find a dice tray or some way of controlling your dice rolls, as you'll be doing a lot of that in Undertow. So I've gone ahead and grabbed the Undertow, official Undertow dice tray. We'll be using this throughout the campaign. It also adds a nice thematic element to the gameplay. Lastly, you're going to want to find the reference sheet about baddie skills and encounter terms. This is a double-sided reference sheet that I know from experience is extremely useful. The official title of this is the Gearloc Adventuring Reference Guide. Get this thing in front of you as you prepare for your campaign in Too Many Bones Undertow. And that's going to conclude the solo setup for Too Many Bones Undertow from Chip Theory Games. Thank you guys so much for watching. Really appreciate it and really hope that this helps get Too Many Bones Undertow off the shelf for you guys and onto the table. Hopefully you'll join me for the showcase and the playthrough that is to come for Undertow. We have Duster and Gasket going after Nobulus in an epic adventure that is going to be extremely fun. Hopefully you'll be commenting down below as we go through this journey, giving me tips and tricks as we go along and try to fight our way all the way to the very end to take down the tyrant. Thanks again for watching, and as always, keep on rolling solo.